Welcome to Save on Plants. This info video is going to focus on the proper methods for planting plastic potted plants. Properly rooted plastic potted plants can be planted throughout the summer. However, extra care needs to be taken to make sure that the roots do not dry out when exposed to the air. Cedars should be planted in late April, early May, or in early September for best results. Late April, early May, balled and burlapped is the best way to go, whereas in early September we only recommend plastic potted cedars that were balled and burlapped in the spring, grown in plastic pots through the summer with a proper soil medium along with bone meal in preparation for their planting in September. For more information on cedars and their planting techniques, which is a little different than the other plants, we recommend that you watch our info video on cedars specifically. Drainage test holes. The idea of a drainage test hole is to find out how well your soil drains, because this will determine which plants will do well there and how often and how much they should be watered. More test holes, the better. Drainage may vary greatly even within a short distance. A minimum of every 6 feet is the distance required for good testing of drainage holes. Best method is to use the drain holes as your planting holes. In other words, wherever you're going to put a plant, make that a drain hole. Now you're checking exactly where the plant is going to be for its drainage. Ideally, have all your holes dug ahead of time and test all of the holes. What you want to do is dig the holes to the approximate size that you're going to need for the root ball of that particular plant. Fill your holes slowly with water and then note the length of time required to completely drain. You'll notice that in the diagram we show the depth of that hole is approximately the same depth as your final hole for your root ball and the same width. In other words, make the hole for your root ball also your test hole. Allowing water to drain completely before watering is as important as the watering itself. If it is not allowed to drain completely, the plant will suffocate. Just think of a human being underneath the water. Humans may like to swim, they may like to go underwater for a while, but they can't stay there very long. They have to get back up above the water level. So soil that is moist is not a problem. It's being below actually saturated water in the soil. That's where you run into trouble. So make sure that you know how long it takes for that water to completely drain from that hole. And you have to make a note of this, because throughout the summer when you're watering the plants, by watering heavily and then monitoring how long you wait before your next watering, you will know whether or not there is water at the bottom of that hole. Keep plants in pots hydrated, in other words well watered, until ready to plant. Never take your plants out of the pot and leave them out in the air for any period of time. They need to go pretty well directly from your plastic pot into your hole ready to be planted. And it's always a good idea, no matter when you're planting, to always fill your holes with water ahead of time. A, this tells you how quickly your water drains, and B, it allows some water to saturate the immediate area. Because even if you were to water your plants very heavily after initially planting them, if it's been dry, the surrounding soil will siphon the water away from your plant. And even though you've given that plant lots of water, the soil around it wants to go to an equilibrium, and it does so by taking the water away from the root ball of your plant. So always dig your holes, fill them up with water, plant your plant, and then water them again. In April, this would be about every 3 days as far as maintaining your plants until they're ready to plant. In other words, if you pick up your plants on a Saturday but you're not going to plant them until Tuesday, well, you're probably going to water as soon as you get home once, and then maybe one more time again before you're ready to plant them on that Tuesday. So you need to water them while they're in plastic pots during April about every 3 days. Now, as the weather gets warmer in the months of May all the way to August, you're going to be watering every day or every 2 days while they're in plastic pots. It's hard to overwater a plant in a plastic pot because they drain rather quickly, and usually any plant that's in a plastic pot is going to be a very light soil that does not hold water for very long. The water will run through it quite quickly. So during a heat wave, you would be watering anything you're storing in a plastic pot every day. If it's just average weather throughout the summer, a good heavy watering every 2 days should be enough. Now, always avoid planting during strong sun or extremely hot days. Early morning or late evening is the best time for planting. Always minimize the exposure of the roots to the sun. Those outside root fibers on that root ball will be exposed to the sun and they will dry up very quickly. So ideally, plant early in the morning, late in the evening. The sun is not as strong. Keep the root ball in the pot as long as possible. And always a good idea to actually water your plants in the plastic pot just before you're about to plant them, as well as again putting water into your hole before you plant them. Always avoid planting during heat waves. You can wait a few more days. In the meantime, place the plants in a half sun, half shade location, and if it's a heat wave, you should water every single day while they're in plastic pots. Now watch this complete slide presentation along with the other one on watering before you commence any work. Paper pots on plants, these are never to be removed. While this info video is on plastic pots, we don't distinguish paper pots from balled and burlapped or plastic pots. The methods are basically the same. The key point is that paper pots, or sometimes called fiber pots, are never to be removed. They are to stay on those particular plants. These are generally spring dug plants. The root system is not established on them, and if you were to remove the paper pot, you would be disturbing the root system. So there's no need to remove that paper pot. You can cut some slits on the side and the bottom if you like, but just kind of treat it as if there is no paper pot there. There has been problems in the past where some of these pots do not deteriorate. These are not the type that we use. The ones that do not deteriorate contain tar, and it's the tar that stops that paper from decomposing. Ours will decompose within about 3 months if sitting on moist soil. Once they're in the ground, the whole side itself will probably decompose in 3 months completely. So don't worry about taking these pots off. Once they're planted in the ground, the brim of that paper pot is to be about an inch above the ground, and you can cut that brim off, which is a good idea. Otherwise, that will actually siphon water up away from the root system if the weather gets really hot during the summer. So you can cut that brim off, or you can put soil on top of the brim, again to cover it or protect it from the sun and the wind from drying up the paper, which will siphon water up from below the ground from the roots. Now, warranty is void if any plants where they have a fiber pot that's removed. Fiber pots have to remain on the plants when planted in order for the warranty to be valid. Removing root balls from a plastic pot does not have to be difficult. There's a tendency for a lot of people to want to cut the pots off. There is really no reason to ever have to cut a pot off. I've been in the business for over 20 years. I've never cut one pot off in my life. It's always easier and safer to not cut the pot off. You can always work it out by pulling it, usually in a horizontal direction. You lay the plant over and you pull gently on the trunk, and usually the plants will slide right out because it's a tapered plastic pot. If it's difficult, it's not coming out real easy, it could be because it's getting root bound inside there and the roots are swelling up. Now, in this case, all you'd have to do is probably roll the plastic pot back and forth a couple times. Worst case scenario, you may have to tap it with a hammer lightly and it will slide out. But always avoid cutting the pot off. Never a good idea. You can hurt yourself, and it tends to be a lot more work than just sliding it out. If it's a big plant, it's easier to do it with 2 people. One person would hold the pot at 180-degree angles from each other, while the other person pulls the trunk away from his helper. Now, always be gentle with the root ball. Sometimes the root system is not, we'll say, root bound yet. It's not 100% where it's holding all the soil as tight as you'd like it to be. Again, not a big problem as long as you're gentle with the root ball. And you never know really what you're going to get into until you pull this out of the plastic pot. So always treat it as if it's very gentle or very delicate while you're pulling it out, because you don't want to disturb that root system and have a clump of roots fall off on you. Pull it out slowly, gently, and once it comes out, you'll see if it's tight or if it's loose. If the roots are tight, they need to be loosened up because you can't leave them that way. Otherwise, they will become root bound. They'll keep growing in this tight circle, and that will kill the tree. If the roots have not gone to the outside of the root ball, or the roots are extremely loose on the outside and very fine, then you may not have to even scratch up the roots at all. You can probably just plant it as is. Here's a photograph of a plant that has become root bound. Not the end of the world, but very important that you have to scratch these roots up. It's a good root system, but if it's left in this particular shape and condition, those roots will continue to grow in a tight circular pattern, ultimately choking the tree off and killing it. So it's a good thing because the roots are what you want. It's a negative thing because you have to do a little bit of work to scratch those roots up, but really nothing to be concerned about. Scratch them up with a garden claw, screwdriver, whatever it takes, and don't worry about being gentle with those roots. You're not going to damage them. The thing you have to watch out from is leaving it out in the air too long or into the sun where the root system starts to dry up on you. Water your plant before you start working on it, and once it comes out of the pot, work on it quickly, get it into the hole, get it covered up with dirt, and water that root ball again. Here's an example of a garden claw being used to scratch up the root system. It is important at this part that we stress to you that you only disturb the roots on plastic potted root balls. If the root ball comes balled and burlap to you, you do not take the burlap material off, you do not cut the burlap material, you do not do anything with that burlap material. As you receive that root ball wrapped in burlap, that entire ball goes into the ground. After it's planted, after the root ball is covered with dirt, you can untie the burlap material at the base of the trunk and you would pull that apart. But under no circumstances are you to take that burlap material completely off or to disturb that root system whatsoever. With our root balls, we do not treat our materials. They will decompose in about 30 to 45 days. We do not treat our materials with any type of arsenic or copper sulfate to extend the life of that material. You don't want to do that because that will restrict the growth of those roots. Now the actual hole that you're going to prepare for your tree should be about twice the volume of the actual root ball that you're going to be placing in there. Again, this info video is on plastic pot or plastic rooted root systems that are in plastic pots, but it's the same guidelines for balled and burlapped. And if you take a look to the right of the hole where the tree is going to be sitting, we have another hole, and we call this the Big O inspection pipe. And what this is for you to see how much water or moisture is at the bottom of the root ball at the same depth as the bottom of the root ball. So if you look, there's a dashed red line that goes across from the hole for the plant, and it's at the same level as the bottom of the Big O pipe, which is located a foot or two away from the root ball itself. And the idea is you do not see the bottom of the root ball normally, so you can't tell if it's sitting in water, or if it's dry, or what the conditions are down there. This Big O inspection pipe located near the root ball, and is going to be exposed also to the same conditions of that root ball, will give you a very good idea what the moisture content is at the bottom of your root ball for your plant. Now there's no dirt put into the hole of the Big O. You want it totally empty and clear, because that red arrow pointing down to the bottom, that's going to be your hand. You will put your hand down the bottom of the Big O pipe, touch the soil or the water to see what's going on down there, and then you'll have the information you need to determine whether or not it's time to water again, because you never water your plants again until the water is completely drained. And in some cases you're going to wait 24 hours or possibly even longer before you water again. But you never water if there is water sitting at the bottom of that root ball. If the bottom of the root ball is sitting in water, that's more than enough. You now need to allow that water to drain completely. If you have very heavy clayish type soil, this may take a while. And we'll give you information specifically with that later on in our info video, because if you got heavy soil that drains very slowly, you are going to be putting a lot less water into your hole than you would if you have normal drainage or sandy soil. Another point here is if you look at the sides of the holes around that root ball, it's kind of a squiggly line. What we're trying to present there is that the sides are rough. You do not want a smooth surface around where your root ball is going to be, because those roots, as they grow out, will hit the smooth surface, bounce back in towards the center of the plant, and end up choking themselves out again. So a rough surface, even though it doesn't look as nice, is actually much better for the plant long term than a smooth surface. This can become a problem when people use augers to make their holes because the auger makes a beautiful smooth surface. If you've got heavy clayish type soil, what will happen is the roots will bounce off that smooth surface and come back towards the center of the plant, and down the road will choke the tree out. So keep this in mind, especially with heavy soils. Do not try to make a beautiful smooth surface. Make it rough. The roots will get into the crevices of that rough surface, and that will force them to continue in that direction rather than bouncing off a smooth side. Another point here I want to mention, if you look at the top of that root ball, it is higher than the surrounding soil. This is generally our advice for most soil conditions. If by chance you've got sandy beach soil, which occurs probably 1 or 2% of the time, very rare, you could go flush with the top of your root ball. But otherwise, always plant an inch or so above the surrounding soil. Now this shows an alternative location for the inspection pipe. In the previous slide, we showed that the inspection pipe was located outside of the hole where the root ball was. Here we have it inside of the hole, and this might be the only option for you if you've got a very tight area. So this is fine, but don't have it right up against the root ball. Keep at least 8 inches away from the big O, or keep the big O pipe at least 8 inches away from your root ball. As mentioned earlier, whenever you're planting, you should always fill your holes with water first. This does two things. It helps to saturate the surrounding soil, plus it gives you information as to how quickly the water will drain in your particular type of soil. And a lot of times what you'll have to do is you may have your plants home, you're ready to plant, however you haven't tested your soil yet and you haven't put water into your holes yet. It's probably easier to water one day your holes or fill them up, and then make plants actually plant the following morning, early in the morning. And most of the work is the actual holes being dug. So if you've got that all done, you can put a lot of plants in the ground in less than an hour, as long as your holes are already dug and the ground's been watered already at least once. You'll notice too that we flood the area with water, and you don't just flood the hole for the tree, you have to flood your test hole, because you want to duplicate the conditions in your test hole that are going to be around your plant. Otherwise you're going to get a false reading. Now natural rain obviously duplicates the conditions for both the test hole and the plant hole identically the same. But when you're watering manually, you would have to directly fill your hole, your test hole, with water, as well as the hole around the tree. Now, when you're watering the tree, you're probably going to use about 20 times as much water as required to fill your test hole. So keep that in mind. Just because your test hole filled with water in 5 or 10 seconds, your tree itself is going to take probably 20 times that in terms of volume and time, simply because it's a bigger hole. Now this particular video, when you put this much water in your system, this is when you have average soil or sandy soil. If you have slow draining soil, you would not be using this method. You would be using half the amount of water, and we will identify for you later on whether or not you have slow draining soil or medium to fast draining soil. The idea of the inspection pipe, and we can't stress this enough, is to allow a window into the water level down at the depth of the root ball bottom. If there is water at the bottom of the inspection pipe, then there is water at the bottom of the root ball, and you do not need to water. Again, you have to mimic the conditions at the big O inspection hole right the same as you would at the plant itself. They have to be exposed the same way. So you need, say, 1 gallon of water to fill your inspection hole. You now have to multiply by 10 or 20 times as much to fill the area around the root ball of the plant. During the first year, you should water heavy again shortly after the water has drained away at the bottom of the inspection pipe. In most cases, within 24 hours after is about the right time, but the water has to be gone completely, 100% gone. You can't have water sitting in there. If you have water sitting in there, you are not to water again. During the next year, you can extend the timing between the watering. The amount of water will actually increase as the plant becomes larger. It will need more water. However, you'll be increasing the time between the waterings by even more. So during the first year, you might find yourself watering every 2 or 3 days heavy. During the second year, you might water every 3 or 4 days heavy, but you'll be using 10 or 15% more water during that second year per application than during the first year because you have a larger tree now. Now, preparing your hole for the planting, you want to mix some bone meal at the bottom of the root system. So this is the brown bar that you see in our diagram here. You would have at least 1 or 2 cups of bone meal, depending on the size of your plant, mixed in with the soil mixture, and your root ball is going to be sitting directly on top of that. That area there should be flat and loose. You want that root ball to settle into that soil. Now, if it's a plastic pot, it's going to have a flat bottom, so you'd want to have a flat bottom in your hole, and it'll sit directly on top of that. Don't forget, you do have to loosen your roots up before you actually do the planting. Now, I want to again stress again, nothing goes into your big O pipe. The big O pipe is left empty because where that blue arrow is right now, that is going to be your hand going down to the bottom of that root ball or that big O pipe to see if there's moisture down there. When the hole is half filled with the soil mixture and the bone meal that you've put in so far, begin adding more water. You want that soil to start settling down. You don't want any air pockets in there. Continue adding bone meal and the soil mixture until you get to the top of that root ball. And you can always add about 1 inch of soil mixture on top of the root ball, but not against the trunk of the tree. Always keep dirt and mulch away from the trunk of the tree, and you flood it the first time. You want a lot of water no matter what the conditions are because you've got to get that soil to settle down. You're not even necessarily watering the root ball. What you're doing is watering the soil. You want that soil to settle down. You can't have air pockets around your root ball. Again, note the top of that root ball is sitting slightly higher than the ground around it, and you can mound soil on top of that, but not against the trunk of the tree. Here is a more finished diagram showing the brown line at the top would be your finished grade. Now you add dirt back into the hole a little bit at a time, alternating between the bone meal, and you're probably going to use about a cup of bone meal to every 3 to 4 gallon size pot. Every pot we have has a standard industry standard size, whether it's 1 gallon or 20 gallon size pot, and you need about a cup of bone meal per 3 to 4 gallon of pot size. When the hole is filled, you want to water heavy again. Press down on the soil with your hands only to help eliminate the air pockets around there. Do not step on the root ball. You should only be using your hands to compress that soil, break up the soil. You can damage root balls by stepping directly on the root ball. In this case, again, this is plastic potted, but damage can easily happen to balled and burlapped. So you never step on any type of plant, no matter what, on the root ball. Always use your hands and always off to the side of the root ball. There's no need to be pressing on the root ball itself. And we always stress that you use 50% triple mix with 50% native soil. You don't want to use 100% triple mix with any of your plants. It can be a little bit too rich. Boxwoods seem to tend to take pure triple mix very well, but as a general rule, 50% triple mix, 50% native soil, plus your bone meal, and you won't have. Now, during the second year, this is not the year you're planting it, the year afterwards, we will give you, depending on how much you've purchased, a supply of commercial grade fertilizer for free, no cost. This is the best stuff you can buy. It's what the professionals use, and it's got a special osmocote coating on it. It's released based on the temperature, precipitation, etc. It's a very good fertilizer, but you can't use it the first year. You don't use any fertilizers the first year. You use only bone meal, which is a root stimulant, or calfloss, which is also a root stimulant. You do not use any type of fertilizer from anybody during the first year because that pushes the plant and it's not established yet. You want those roots to be really well established before you're asking the plant to start growing quickly. So just let natural growth be what you're going to get the first year. Second year you come back, we give you free fertilizer in most cases, and that you would apply that ideally at the end of April, early May. Okay, April and May, there's some planting precautions that we are recommending now. The weather has been fluctuating more wildly than what we've been accustomed to in the past. We've had some really warm Aprils and some really cold Aprils. So, as an extra precaution, what we're recommending that people do until the end of May is be on alert for possible frost damage, which is always a possibility. We do like to plant in later April. That's a great time to plant before the roots start to push out, especially on the cedars. But if you're doing that, be on alert for possible frost stress. Now, frost stress is the worst you can get. It's worse than having ice on your plants. Ice actually will not bother your plants. It will actually protect your plants. But frost, because of the shape of the molecules in the frost itself, what you end up getting is these jagged little edges that literally will damage the surface of your plants. So you want to protect your plants from frost, and you can get frost almost till the end of May. So we definitely don't encourage you to plant any perennials until the latter part of May. But with a lot of the evergreens, trees, it is good to plant them in late April or early May, but be a little bit on the alert for frost. The best way to protect against that is to either throw a bed sheet over top of the plant if it's going to be below 7 degrees Celsius that night, and it has to be a calm night. A couple things have to be present for frost. One is below 7 degrees Celsius, also very little wind. In other words, a calm night, and then no clouds. If you got all three of those things, you're going to have frost that night, guaranteed. And severity of frost can vary quite a bit depending on those conditions. But if it's raining, you're not going to have frost. If there's a lot of cloud cover, you won't have frost. If it's windy, there's no frost. If it's above 7 degrees, there's no frost. So, but you're going to get several days between the end of April to the end of May where there is definitely a good chance of frost, and you want to protect against that no matter what. Again, quick way to doing it for a smaller area would be just throw a bed sheet, a blanket, whatever you want, over top of the plants in the evening, and they can actually stay on all day. It's not a problem for the plant. It might get blown off. You got to put it back on. If it's a little bit of windy in the evening, but the conditions look like you might get frost because things will calm down later, and your bed sheet's getting blown off, what you can do is spray water on top of the bed sheet. That will give it some weight so it doesn't blow off. And if it's cold enough, it'll actually freeze up a little bit, which is even better because less likely that it's going to blow off with that stiffness in it. So you can do that to protect your plant against cedars or against frost. Another quick way to do it too is you can spray water on your plant late in the evening just before you go to bed, and that will add another level of protection on your evergreens especially. You won't have to worry about this in most cases with deciduous plants, just your evergreens, and in particular with the cedars. You might get a little bit of frost damage on them. So you can't spray them. You spray them with water just before you go to bed. You don't even have to put anything on top of that. That water alone will do quite a bit to protect them. But if you did a combination of spraying water and then a bed sheet on top and spray water again, you're not going to have any problems at all. You don't want to use solid plastics on your evergreens for a couple reasons. One is they'll blow off real easy. All it takes one little gust of wind and it'll be blown off in no time. So something solid like a sheet of plastic generally does not work very well to stay on all night. In addition, if you forget and leave the plastic on the next day, you can create problems with it overheating underneath it. So a bed sheet is not a problem. You can forget about it. You can leave it on there the next day. It's not going to harm your plant. You don't want to leave it on permanently, but for a couple of days you can leave a bed sheet on an evergreen. It's not going to bother the plant at all. Here's a side sketch of, say, a backyard with a slope to it. The green down line is your backyard. At the very bottom you'll see there's a blue line, and this is where the water is going to end up accumulating. Again, if you were to plant upslope on that line, that green line, and you dig a hole down, the water would now accumulate inside that hole. Even though it's not the lowest point in the backyard, relatively it is the lowest point because you've got the soft soil that allows the water to drain down to the bottom of that soil until it hits the hard soil at the bottom of your hole. One way to get around that, if you're planting up a slope, is if you want to imagine this, you're up in the air looking down on your backyard. The hole is The blue hole there with the word hole in the center is what you've prepared for your new plant, and just above that is a half moon. And the idea of that half moon is to prepare a dam or a diversion for the water that's running down the slope of your backyard, which is the blue arrows. Those blue arrows, when they get to that dam, will now bounce off it to the side, run past the hole. So rather than running down into the hole, they're running past the hole, and this way the hole doesn't overfill with water, keeping the root system too wet for too long. Make note if you have any downspouts that are coming towards the new plants that you're putting in, because if you do have a downspout, you have to keep in mind that the water from that roof area is all going to come down into a very small concentrated area, and that area is going to be a lot wetter than what you would expect, especially compared to the rest of the yard, which will be much drier. So despite people believing that cedars want to be wet all the time, they really don't want to be wet all the time. They want to be lightly moist all the time, but not sitting in water. It's just like a human being. If they sat or were below water for too long a period of time, they would suffocate, and so would the roots of cedars or any other plants. There are very few plants that can actually sit in water for any period of time. Some hydrangea varieties can tolerate water for long periods of time, but generally speaking, most plants cannot. So if you see areas like this in your backyard, that is an area where water is accumulating for one reason or another. It might be a low point, there might be a downspout from your house, your neighbor's house, runoff from a driveway, a patio, etc. But that's a red flag right there. Here's a beautiful patio, probably about 100 feet across from the grass up towards the house. And keep in mind that there's probably a downward slope on that patio towards the grass. And what's going to happen when it rains, if you get a half an inch of rain, which is that's a pretty good rain, all that water that's falling down the patio is going to accumulate as it runs down the slope and then just drop off the edge. So at the very edge of this patio, you're not going to get half an inch of rain. You're going to get 2 feet of rain, literally, coming down in that one small area. So that area is going to get very wet, and if there isn't good drainage, if it's not real sandy soil, and most people don't have real sandy soil, that water is going to sit there for quite a while. And if you've got really heavy clay, it could end up being wet permanently. So again, test holes are very important to keep an eye on what's going on with drainage, but this is a red flag easily seen on a basic site inspection. And keep this in mind when you're looking around your backyard, patios, driveways, etc. They are all going to have runoff, and they multiply the amount of water that is present along the edge there where you may be placing plants. Now, salting is very common on sidewalks and driveways, etc. Obviously, the benefit is that it eliminates the ice, makes it a safer walking surface. However, plants do not like salt. There is no plant that likes salt. Some plants will tolerate it better than others. We encourage you to use absolutely no salt around any of the plants, regardless. However, if there's a situation where there may be a minimal amount of salt that you just can't prevent because of a road or a sidewalk, etc., you're best to use black cedars. They can tolerate salt. Again, they don't like it, but they can tolerate some salt, and you'll have better results with them because the salt will kill most plants. So don't waste your money on the plants or the time of planting them. If you plan on using salt, don't even put them in there. So don't plant your cedars near any large trees. Keep in mind the canopy that's above the ground there, the leaves, down below, that's about how far the roots will spread out. And at the very edges, it's quite thin, but they will still suck up a lot of water right to the edge of that canopy. So anything planted underneath that canopy is going to be in competition with a much, much larger tree that's going to have a lot more success. A typical large tree will suck up 100 to 200 gallons of water a day, believe it or not. And any cedar that's in that area is going to have a hard time getting its water or the nutrition that it needs to do well. Not to mention it's probably in the shade also if it's underneath that canopy. Now, how would you describe the wind in your area? Keep this in mind and bring that information with you when you come down, because it will affect on what variety of cedars we may recommend to you, or to give you some strategies on how to prevent wind damage. Generally speaking, if it's a very congested subdivision, you're going to have protection one way or another. But even within subdivisions, where there's a lot of houses and trees around already, what you could get is some very concentrated wind tunnels between the homes. The homes nowadays might be as close as 6 or 8 feet apart from each other, and you're going to have all that wind being diverted around the edge of the house and down that wind tunnel. So you can have some pretty strong winds, even in, say, a protected subdivision area. A wooden fence along where your cedars are going to be is usually a good idea. It reduces the wind through the plant itself, as well as providing a little bit of shade to the ground. So during the hot summer months, it does keep the ground a little bit cooler. Now be sure to watch our other info videos on watering and fertilizing. After poor roots, improper watering is the cause of most plant failures. If you need any assistance, please call immediately, especially at the first sign of a cedar fading in color. Cedars seldom recover, but if you pick it early enough, you may be able to save the rest of your cedars by adjusting the watering, which is generally the problem you're going to have. Again, if you go into our other info videos, you'll start to understand where and why roots are the main cause of failures for cedars. And with our particular cedars, that's not an issue because we properly cultivate the root systems. So if there's a problem with one of our cedars, the root cause 99 out of 100 times is going to be improper watering. Generally, not enough water, once in a while, too much water. So you have to understand what the proper watering amount and the frequency is in order to avoid any trouble. And at the first sign of a problem, we want you to contact us because we can get you back on track. Waiting until several start to fade on you is going to be too late, because at that point the rest are probably already stressed. Cedars do not tell you when they need water, they tell you when they're dead. Once you start to fade out like that, the chance of recovery is extremely slim. Now, we're more than happy to share our info files with you. They're available on YouTube, etc., at our website. In addition, you can come in with your own USB transfer stick, and we will transfer the whole library over onto your transfer stick at no charge, of course. And you'll have probably a little higher quality and maybe a little bit easier to view than being on YouTube. So feel free to bring your stick in. If we're delivering to you, we'll bring a USB stick with us, and you can borrow that while we're unloading. You can load it onto your computer. We're always very happy to share whatever information we can give you. So thank you very much again from Save on Plants. Happy gardening, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care. Bye now.